Hi, thank you so much for joining. We'll be getting started in just 1 minute or so. So for questions, we'll get to this in a minute, but for questions, if you can drop them in the question and answer box, and we'll be sure to answer those as we get to the end of the presentation. But if you want to drop your questions, you can drop them in at any point, and we'll be sure to answer them as we go along. And so again, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A, and we'll get started in just 1 minute. All right. Let's just jump right in. All right, so welcome to our webinar on accessing President Biden's student debt cancellation program. We're going to go ahead and get started now. I'm Kat Welbeck, Advocacy Director at the Student Borrower Protection Center. And so just a little bit of a background on the SBPC. We're a national nonprofit organization solely focused on alleviating the burden of student debt in this country. So we do that through a range of things. So advocacy, policymaking, and litigation strategy, all aimed at reining in industry abuses, protecting borrowers' rights, and advancing economic opportunity across this country. And so I'm really excited to talk to you all today. Just one note about questions as we go along. Feel free to place them in the question and answer box, and we'll gather those questions throughout the presentation and answer them at the end. And so we'll try to make sure we can get to all of them. If you have any, but feel free to drop them in as we go. All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to spend time today laying out different options for student debt cancellation. So these include updates to the cancellation proposal that President Biden announced in August, the income-driven repayment account adjustment, and public service loan forgiveness. We'll also have, again, plenty of time for question and answer at the end. So if you have questions on these topics, we'll try to answer them as best we can. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about President Biden's cancellation plan. So as many of you all likely know, this past August, in recognition of the harmful economic effects of the student debt crisis, President Biden announced a broad student debt relief plan for federal student loan borrowers who met certain income requirements. And so what this plan would do is to provide up to $20,000 in debt cancellation for student loan borrowers who previously received a Pell Grant at any point in their educational career, to attend college, and also meet certain income requirements. The plan will also cancel $10,000 for borrowers who did not receive a Pell Grant, but also meet certain income requirements. To be eligible, borrowers must have earned under $125,000 as an individual or $250,000 as a couple or head of household in either 2020 or 2021 tax year. For the majority of borrowers, an application process is required. But for those who've already shared income information with the Department of Education, there's a slightly different process. We're going to talk a little bit about this application process because, as you all also likely know, this plan was blocked by federal court. So we're going to talk about what that means for people who may have already applied or people who had yet to apply before the courts. And so also, as part of this announcement on debt cancellation, the administration extended the payment pause through December 31st of 2022. And then because of the court cases late last year, the payment pause has been extended through either June of 2023 or 60 days after the final the final disposition of these cases in the courts. In addition to the announcement of the extension of the payment pause, it was also announced that the Department of Education would would announce a new income-driven repayment plan that would drastically lower payments for student loan borrowers. And actually today, the Department of Education released those proposed rules. And so you'll have more information in the coming days about what this is actually going to look like. So things to note about this debt relief plan, it was historic, and in the months before the court cases, 26 million people applied for relief, and then actually 16 million people were already approved, but are currently waiting again on what happens in the courts. And so again, as you might know, and I kind of mentioned throughout, a federal judge in Texas and a panel of judges in Missouri blocked President Biden's student debt relief plan in mid-November. And so what we've seen is that the Department of Justice has appealed this decision to the Supreme Court, and we're expecting to have oral arguments on February 28th of this year. And so while these cases are still pending, the Department of Education is no longer accepting applications. Although the debt relief program is blocked for now, we are confident that the Biden administration will find a way to get this debt relief across the finish line. Okay. And so what's next, and what should you know? Because we say, okay, this is a really historic relief program, but it's been blocked in the courts. What do you need to know about this program if you have applied already and you're just kind of waiting to see what happens, or if you did not apply before these cases were brought before courts? So what do you do next? So a list of things that you can do, again, based on whether you have applied for debt relief already, or if you've yet to do so. If you already applied, you should have received a confirmation email from the Department of Education. So you should check to see that you have that. What the Department of Education is going to do, they're going to keep these applications on file while the Department of Justice is appealing this and while the Supreme Court is deciding this case. And so unless you hear from the Department of Education requesting further information, you don't need to do anything further. So just make sure that, again, your contact information is up to date with the Department of Education, and you can do all of that on the Federal Student Aid website, which we're going to talk a little bit about a little bit later. And then also, so you can also stay up to date with these announcements and what's going on with the Department of Education in regard to this by subscribing at ed.gov/subscriptions. If you have not applied before these court cases were brought, you can also sign up for updates at the Department of Education, again, at the same place, ed.gov/subscriptions. One thing you can also do is make sure that you have qualifying loans and find out if you've ever received a Pell Grant to pay for your education, which would determine if you're eligible for $10,000 or $20,000 once this is resolved. All right, and so let's talk about what type of loans are eligible for this program. So again, as you'll remember, as the program was announced, borrowers had to earn below a certain income and must have qualifying federal loans held by the Department of Education in order to be eligible for relief. And so those loans include all federal direct loans. And so these are subsidized federal loans, Parent Plus loans, and these are loans that parents take out to support their children going to college. Also, Grad Plus loans are eligible. Those are loans that are taken out for graduate education, and also direct consolidation loans. Other loans held by the federal government, specifically Family Federal Education Loans, so that's FFEL loans held by the Department of Education, and Perkins loans held by the Department of Education. Additional loans include all defaulted loans held by the Department of Education or commercially serviced. And so those include defaulted subsidized Stafford and unsubsidized Stafford loans, defaulted Parent Plus or Grad Plus loans, and then defaulted Ed held loans. One really quick tip to determine whether or not your loans qualify: if you had loans that were paused or over the course of the pandemic, due to the payment pause, your loans are eligible for this cancellation program pending the decision in the courts. So now, as you can see from the red text at the bottom of this page, as of September 29th, the Biden administration announced that any privately owned Fell or Perkins loans that are not owned by the Department of Education are not eligible for relief under this cancellation program that is still pending through the courts. So any borrower who consolidated commercially held Fell or Perkins loans prior to September 29th, you should be fine, again, once we get a final decision based on the court cases, but any new consolidations will not be eligible. Okay, so some of you might be thinking, how do I tell what type of loans that I have to begin with? And so don't worry, we're going to have a whole slide dedicated to that later in the presentation. Again, we're also happy to answer those questions as they come up. And also, before I jump into this, a quick note talking about the difference between what is a Department of Education held Fell loan and what is a commercially held Fell loan. This is also going to also be relevant as we talk about other pathways to cancellation, like the income-driven repayment plan, account adjustment, and then also public service loan forgiveness. And so we're going over this again. Yes, I know I've said many times, we're still waiting on the courts for President Biden's broad cancellation plan, but it's also going to be really important to know what type of loans you have as we get into later parts of this presentation and we talk about these other programs and pathways to relief. And so, as I mentioned on the previous slide, Fell loans that are held by the Department of Education are eligible for student debt relief. So if you have a commercially held Fell loan, that will not be eligible for President Biden's cancellation plan. One way to tell is that commercially held Fell loans have not been receiving the payment pause, while Department of Education held Fell loans have been receiving it. Another way to find out is to log into studentaid.gov, and we're gonna go through studentaid.gov in a little bit, and view your student loan dashboard. Once there, you'll be able to see if your loans are held by a private lender such as a bank, or if the lender is listed as a Department of Education. And so finding out this information will enable you to tell if you're eligible for the debt relief plan announced in August. So in response to the courts blocking student debt relief, one thing we're doing is calling on President Biden to cancel student debt using all available tools. We believe he has the legal authority to do this now, but because it's blocked in the courts, we want to make sure that he does everything he can to deliver on the relief that he promised to student loan borrowers. And so what you can do is you can send a letter to the president calling on him to cancel student debt at our Action Network page that's listed here. And we'll also send this in a follow-up email along with a recording of this presentation. Okay. So we wanted to give you an update on the cancellation program because we know people have had a lot of questions about what's going on or what to expect. And again, we know 26 million people submitted applications. So we know a lot of people were anticipating that program. And so while that's currently been blocked in the courts and we're waiting for a decision there and waiting on the Biden administration to act, one thing that we also want to let you know is that there are other pathways to student debt relief that you might be eligible for. And so we want to talk about these different pathways and different options that might apply to you. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to shift gears to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which again is another way to get your debt canceled if you work in a qualified public service job. And recently, the Department of Education has relaxed some of these requirements. So you might be able to benefit from some of these changes. And so we want you to know about that. So we're going to talk briefly about how the program was created. So Congress created the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program in 2007. The idea was to help people working in public service who might be struggling with student debt to make sure that future students and graduates weren't deterred from entering public service, working in their communities, because of, an insurmountable burden of student debt. So put simply, public service loan forgiveness is created on the idea of if you work in public service for 10 years, after making 10 years of student loan payments, your debt should be canceled. Typically, there are four specific criteria to qualify for public service loan forgiveness, and that's: first, you need to have a direct loan. That's one of several federal student loan types. I know we went over those at the top. If you have a FFEL, so again, that FFEL or Perkins loan, You are able to consolidate those loans into direct loans to make them eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. Second, you also need to be in the correct repayment plan. And for this program, that's generally an income-driven repayment plan. Third, you need to work full-time in a public service field, and that could be a local, state, federal, or tribal government. It could be a 501c3 nonprofit or certain other nonprofits, depending on the work that they do. And then finally, you need to make 120 qualifying payments. And 120 payments is just 10 years worth of payments on your loans while meeting the other requirements. So also, there have been some effects of COVID on the public service loan forgiveness program. The most relevant part is that for these loans that are getting the payment pause, so again, since March 2020, when student loans were paused due to COVID through, now and continuing for a bit longer, federal loans owned by the federal government, each month of these suspended payments during the payment pause count towards public service loan forgiveness. So towards that 120 payment requirement. So even though you may not physically be making a payment because of this administrative payment pause, those months still count towards your 120 payment count for public service loan forgiveness. However, you still need to meet each of the other criteria, and the most relevant one being, are you working in a qualified public service? Okay, so there are also certain requirements that the Department of Education has waived for a limited time, and we're going to go over those now. Essentially, the relaxation of some of these requirements gives public service workers credit towards loan forgiveness, regardless of what type of federal student loan they have, for any period of time since October 1st, 2007, when the program first began. And so as long as a student loan borrower was in a qualifying public service employment and their loan was not in default, deferment, or forbearance, and even for months in which borrowers did not actively make a payment, as long as the loan was in repayment status, they can receive credit. These credits are also retroactive. So borrowers can receive credit for past payments that were previously deemed ineligible. So in short, for any months since October 1st, 2007, that a borrower had any type of federal loan, worked for a qualifying public service employer, and was not in default, deferment, or forbearance, that student loan borrower can receive credit towards the 120 months required for loan forgiveness under public service loan forgiveness. So in a few slides, we're also going to talk about how borrowers may be able to receive some credit for time and deferment or forbearance to count towards PSLF as well. One thing to note, these extended benefits are not completely automatic. Normally, PSLF requires that borrowers have a specific loan type, and that's a direct loan. Again, as we discussed, although the waiver allows borrowers with any loan type to get credit, those without direct loans must take some steps to convert their loans into direct loans through a process called consolidation, though they'll still get credit for that time prior to the consolidation. And almost all borrowers, regardless of loan types, will have to certify with the Department of Education any periods of qualifying public service work since October 1st, 2007. The idea here is that, again, when you when you certify your employment, you're raising your hand, telling the Department of Education that you have qualifying work and you want to get credit for public service loan forgiveness. Really important thing to note about this date, May 1st of this year. Importantly, borrowers need to consolidate their direct loans, their loans into direct loans for people who may have FFEL loans, Perkins loans, have to do so before May 1st of this year in order to take advantage of the time-sensitive requirements that have been waived for this program. If you have not done so already, you should submit a PSLF form for all your qualifying work since October 1st of 2007. But this can be completed at any time. The consolidation must happen before May 1st of this year. If you are interested in the PSLF program and want more information, we have webinars specifically geared towards PSLF to break this down. And so you can check out protectborrowers.org /events for more information on these webinars. And then also we'll share this in the follow-up email after today's presentation. You can also visit our website, cancellmystudentdebt.org, which also has more information about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, as well as the other programs we're going to review today. Okay, so we're also going to talk about another option for having your student debt canceled, and that's the income-driven repayment plan. Under the law, Income-driven repayment entitles borrowers to a range of plans that set their monthly payment as an affordable percent of their income and offer cancellation after 20 or 25 years of repayment, depending on which repayment plan that they're in. However, a well-documented history shows that student loan servicers have regularly steered student loan borrowers away from these plans and have widely failed to track borrowers' progress towards promised cancellation. So in April of last year, the Department of Education announced a one-time account adjustment meant to address these historical breakdowns and to give people credit for months that otherwise may not have counted. So for public service workers with student debt, this initiative mirrors the same benefits and protections that have delivered relief to public service workers across the country. These benefits include credit towards both PSLF and debt cancellation under income-driven repayment in a few circumstances. Okay, so how does this adjustment work? So this waiver provides a couple of things that you see here on these slides. First, the waiver provides a pathway to debt cancellation via consolidation for borrowers with older federally guaranteed student loans, also known as federal family education loans or FFEL loans. So again, remember FFEL loans, these loans that predated the direct loan program. This provides a pathway to relief for people who may have these older loans. Credit towards debt cancellation for any monthly payments made, regardless of what payment plan was selected, and regardless of whether or not the payments were made on time, in advance, or late. This also provides credit towards debt cancellation for any member of the military for any period of active duty military service, including during periods of forbearance or deferment. In addition to providing borrowers working in public service with the same opportunity to gain credit towards PSLF, the IDR account adjustment also offers all borrowers, including public service workers, an additional set of protections. And those include credit towards debt cancellation for extended periods of forbearance and certain deferments. So that is either 12 months of consecutive forbearance, 36 months of cumulative forbearance, and it counts deferment that predates 2013 as long as it wasn't an in-school deferment. It also provides credit towards debt cancellation for any borrowers who were steered into forbearance due to misrepresentations by a student loan company. And you can get credit for those months of forbearance by filing a complaint with the Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson. So how do you take advantage of this IDR account adjustment? And IDR stands for income-driven repayment. So how do you take advantage of this? For most borrowers, the adjustment is going to be automatic. However, if you have federal loans that are currently not currently held by the Department of Education, so for example, those commercially held FFEL loans, that's why we went over the different types at the top of this presentation, they'll need to be consolidated before the May 1st deadline to have the adjustment applied to your account. The timeline for this account adjustment to be applied depends on how close you are to that 20 or 25 years needed for cancellation. If you have been in repayment for 20 to 25 years, the Department of Education has stated that it will begin adjusting accounts actually in November of last year. And so if you've not been in repayment that long, all other accounts are going to be adjusted in July of 2023. So also there have been some recent developments related to the IDR account adjustment. So the Department of Education had previously announced that while Parent Plus borrowers would be included in the IDR account adjustment, that the adjusted time would not count towards PSLF. Good news. Thanks to a lot of hardworking advocates, the Department of Education has reversed that policy. This means that in addition to receiving credit for past time that was previously ineligible for income-driven repayment, Parent Plus borrowers can also receive credit for past public service under public service loan forgiveness. The main action item that Parent Plus borrowers need to take is to submit a PSLF form for all previous public service work since October 1st, 2007. However, in order to achieve forgiveness, all borrowers seeking PSLF need to be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan to achieve this cancellation. So that means if you don't already have 10 years of public service in your employment history, you'll need to consolidate in order to access the income-driven repayment plans to get on one before you can have your loans forgiven. This is for Parent Plus borrowers. Okay. Also, just we kind of mentioned this a little bit before, but just another note again, that there was a change to the cancellation announcement from President Biden. So again, this has to do with people who have to consolidate their loans. And this is the reason why we want to add this here, because we talked a lot about consolidating your loans to take advantage of certain programs. And so we want to talk about how these options might vary for different borrowers. As of September 29th of 2022, borrowers with commercial FFEL or Perkins loans held by an institution are no longer eligible for cancellation under the debt relief announcement from August. And we also know, again, that it's still pending in the courts, but either way, it's not eligible. So all borrowers who consolidated before September 29th do not need to worry about this. If you have a mixture of loans that receive the payment pause and some that did not receive the payment pause, consolidating all of those loans together could affect your eligibility for the cancellation of $10,000 or $20,000 under the August announcement. Again, there's a lot up in the air right now, especially with the debt relief plan held up in the courts. But we really want to mention this here because if and when the application becomes available again, you should understand that consolidating all of those loans together could make you ineligible for debt relief. So thinking through your best options for debt cancellation, you might have to consider how long you've been in repayment and how much debt you have in order to make an informed decision about the best option for you personally. Okay, so let's quickly go through how do you figure out which type of loans do you have? Okay, this can be a bit confusing and many people don't necessarily know. To see all of your federal loans, you should log into your online account with studentaid.gov, and that's the website here. And you'll have a dashboard once you enter the site there that lists your loans. Any that say direct loans, direct are direct loan. Any that don't say direct will have to be consolidated. For a more granular list, you can also download your loan data, and you can see on this slide how to navigate to your data. Now on the dashboard that lists your loans, you can see the current balance and that there are little arrows that break down the loan types you have. Here you can see that this person already consolidated their loans and they already have direct loans. So once you're on this page, you'll be able to tell which type of loans you have. And you can see the other categories listed here as well, like Perkins or Grad Plus loans. And certainly, if you download your aid data using the instructions from the last slide, you'll be able to see which ones are direct and which ones are not direct. Now, we talked a lot about if you don't have direct loans, why you might want to consolidate them. So we're going to talk about how do you actually do that. To consolidate your loans, you're going to go back to studentaid.gov. Again, I said this website is really important. We're going to do a lot of this work. So you'll log into studentaid.gov, hover over to manage loans located in the top toolbar, and click on consolidate my loans in the drop-down menu. And then you'll be able to access the consolidation application here. This is literally what it's going to look like. And then it will guide you through the steps you'll need to take, which includes selecting which loans you want to include in the consolidation, confirming the amount and rate of the new loan, selecting your payment plan and servicer, and then signing for the loan. Now, here's a tip specific to right now while these relaxed requirements are in place. If you have a mix of older and newer loans, so some would be closer to the 10 years needed for forgiveness under PSLF, if you consolidate all of the loans together, the new loan will be awarded as much credit towards cancellation as your oldest existing loan. So if you consolidate old and new loans, when the consolidated loan is ultimately forgiven, the entire amount will be forgiven. This is useful for people who have older FFEL loans but newer direct loans. You might not think to consolidate your direct loans because they already qualify, but if you do consolidate them, they'll be canceled on the timeline set by the older FFEL loans. Okay, and then also you'll want to remember for the regular PSLF program, you need to be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan. So when you're consolidating, it's a good idea to select one of these IDR plans for your payment plan. And the same goes for the income-driven repayment plan account adjustment. You'll want to be enrolled in an IDR plan. Some of the names of these plans include income-based repayment, IBR, income contingent repayment, ICR, pay as you earn, or repay, repay. These payment plans within income-driven repayment are all different. And there's a payment calculator tool that will help you choose the payment amount for among these four that's going to be best for you. And so really quickly, before we go through some important takeaways from today's presentation and get to your questions, just also want to make another note about our cancelmystudentdebt.org website. And so this is a website that we've built with some of our partners that features step-by-step guides, recordings from previous webinars, and lists of frequently asked questions on cancellation, income-driven repayment, and PSLF. So you can check it out if you have other questions after today's webinar, or if you want to drill down on some of the topics that we discussed today. Again, this website is also going to be sent in a follow-up email that you'll get after today's webinar. Also, really important takeaways. So what you're going to want to do is really, it's important to explore all the different options you have for cancellation, because we know that people might be able to benefit from one, two, or all of these programs. And so we want to make sure that you know about all the available options to you and you take advantage of them in the way that might apply best for you and your loans and your situation. You need to make sure you determine what type of loans you have, because that's going to tell you what type of steps you may need to take in order to take advantage of these different programs. If you need to, you should consolidate your loans depending, again, on which pathway to cancellation you might be pursuing and then what type of loans you might have. If you experience any issues, you can file complaints with the Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson, and you can do that at the studentaid.gov website. And then also beware of scams. We know a lot of people know that people are looking into a lot about their student loans right now, so really want people to be wary for the potential of scams. And with that, we will jump to questions if there are any. And I see we don't have any now, but we'll give people a moment to ask questions just in case they may have some. And I'm joined by my colleague, Amy, who's going to help us with questions.
Hi, Kat. Thank you. Okay, we have a question. This question is about PSLF. So if someone submitted their PSLF form to their employers for certification, and one employer responded that I did not qualify because I was working as a contractor, even though that was not my choice. Is this correct? So can contracted work count? And is this what this person is experiencing? Is that correct?
That is a really great question. And it's one we get a lot. Public service loan forgiveness has to do with who is your employer. And while you are a contractor doing work with a qualified employer, it's about who's your employer on your W-2. And so in this instance, your employer is likely correct. If, and by your employer, the qualifying place where you work, you might be a contractor, for example. So if you are not an employee on file, unfortunately, you're not going to be eligible, but you have to actually be employed by the qualifying employer. And I know that can be really confusing for people because you might be doing the same work, you might be working in the same space as other people at that organization or at that agency. And yes, and you are employed, but for example, if you contract for a federal or state government and you're a contractor but not paid by the employer, so on your W-2, if it does not say that federal or that state agency and you're a contractor, the Department of Education does make that distinction. And Amy, if there's anything you want to follow up there, but
no, yeah, that's great. I think like the easiest way to boil it down is if you received a W-2 from that time period or not. If you received a 1099, that would disqualify you because that means that you're a contractor. But if you received a W-2, that means that you were directly employed by that employer, and that is what counts for PSLF. So I would, try to find out if you received a W-2 or if you received a 1099, because that will tell you the difference and whether or not you qualify. And thanks, Kat, for answering that. I'm not seeing any more questions yet. Correct. A 1099 does not qualify. But feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and then we can answer them. Yeah, thanks for your question. Okay, we're getting another question. Is there a phone number I can call to discuss a more complicated case of a commercially held federal loan?
That is a really great question. And so while there may not be a phone number, if you reach out to the Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson, so again, you'll go to FSA, studentaid.gov, the studentaid.gov website that we had on the screen. There's a place where you can file a complaint. It will take you to the Ombuds office, and you can send an email, write a note, and they can follow up with you to your complaint. I believe they might be able to follow up with you by phone if you list that's the best way to contact you, but you can start by submitting a complaint at studentaid.gov.
There's also a list of ombudspersons by state that we keep on our website. And so if you live in a state that has an ombudsperson at the state level, you'd be able to contact them as well. And I'll be sharing that tomorrow in a follow-up email to all participants. So you'll be able to see if your state is one of those states that has those as well. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you for joining. And we'll give it one more minute just in case there's any other questions. And so again, for questions about reaching out to someone directly, that would likely be the same answer that Amy just gave on our website, cancelmystudentdebt.org. We do have a list of states with student loan ombudsperson. So if you have someone at, if you live in a state where there's an ombudsperson, you can reach out to the contact information there. Or if you have a question, you can also reach out to federal student aid at studentaid.gov at the ombudsperson's office, like I listed before.
I should mention too that we do have webinars that are specific to for FEL borrowers once a month, and so we do dive into some of those issues related to FEL borrowers in particular and answer questions specific to FEL cases. And I believe our next one is coming up later in the month in January. So check our website, protectborrowers.org, to find out if one's coming up soon, or there definitely are ones coming up soon, and register for one of those as well.
All right. Well, with that, we'll thank you all again for joining us this evening. And like Amy said, she'll be sending out more of this information tomorrow. But thank you so much for joining us tonight. Have a great night. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good night.